Have you ever wondered why we feel so anxious, so overwhelmed by the changes that seem inevitable in life? Why does anxiety often grip us when faced with uncertainty, when faced with loss, or even when facing something as simple as a change in routine? The Buddha's teachings offer profound wisdom on these very questions, pointing to the root causes of anxiety, attachment, and aversion. In this video, we will explore how these mental habits shape our relationship with anxiety and what we can do to transform that relationship for the better. Let's dive into a deeper understanding of these powerful concepts and see how embracing impermanence and practicing compassion can be the keys to finding peace in our turbulent world. Buddhism offers deep insights into human suffering, particularly when it comes to understanding the roots of anxiety. The Buddha's teachings emphasize two core concepts that contribute significantly to anxiety: attachment and aversion. To fully grasp how these mental habits fuel anxiety, it's essential to understand what they represent and how they manifest in our lives. The roots of anxiety: attachment and aversion. Buddhism teaches that attachment and aversion are not just mental states, but ingrained patterns that shape how we relate to the world. These patterns are deeply embedded in our minds and often go unnoticed until we begin to look closely at how they affect our emotional well-being. Attachment, clinging to the past and future. Attachment, in the Buddhist sense, refers to the mind's tendency to hold tightly to what it desires or cherishes. This could be a person, an object, a belief, or even an identity. Attachment is rooted in the desire to maintain control and avoid the fear of loss. Whether we are aware of it or not, we often define ourselves by the people, possessions, and experiences we cling to. This attachment creates a false sense of security, as it convinces us that our happiness and well-being depend on these external factors. For example, consider a famous figure like Steve Jobs, the co-founder of Apple. Jobs was known for his relentless pursuit of perfection and his attachment to his work, his attachment to Apple's success. His vision for technology and his company's ideals were central to his identity. Jobs himself admitted that he often found it hard to relinquish control and delegate tasks, which contributed to stress and moments of anxiety in his life. His attachment to his ideals was both a source of incredible innovation and, at times, personal distress. When these attachments were threatened, whether by business challenges or his own health issues, it became clear that the anxiety he faced stemmed from this grasping nature of attachment. When we attach ourselves too strongly to outcomes or the idea of permanence, anxiety naturally arises. The fear of losing what we hold dear becomes a constant undercurrent. This is why, as the Buddha teaches, attachment is one of the key causes of suffering. It is an emotional tether that binds us to a constantly changing world, leaving us in a constant state of anxiety over potential loss. Aversion, pushing away what we fear. On the other side of the spectrum is aversion, the tendency to push away what is unpleasant or feared. Aversion is rooted in the instinct to avoid discomfort, pain, and suffering. It manifests as resistance, rejection, or denial of unpleasant thoughts, emotions, or situations. We often try to run away from discomfort by distracting ourselves, changing the situation, or using external substances or activities to suppress our inner turmoil. A good example of aversion in the modern world can be seen in the life of someone like Elon Musk, the CEO of Tesla and SpaceX. Musk is known for his bold vision of the future and his drive to reshape industries. However, as he has grown more successful, he has also faced increasing pressure and criticism, especially regarding his public statements or the risks associated with his companies. Musk's tendency to be overly vocal on social media and his reluctance to confront certain criticisms publicly often stem from aversion to being misunderstood or disliked. This aversion leads to reactive decisions that only amplify his personal anxiety, whether it's regarding public backlash or the weight of expectations placed on his shoulders. When we resist reality, whether it's aging, financial uncertainty, health issues, or personal challenges, we inadvertently make those experiences even more difficult. Instead of addressing these fears, we push them away, only for them to resurface in other forms, often escalating the anxiety. The Buddha's insight, impermanence. Buddhism teaches that both attachment and aversion stem from a fundamental misunderstanding of the nature of reality. This misunderstanding is rooted in the belief that things are permanent and unchanging. The Buddha's insight was clear: everything is impermanent. When we cling to the transient, whether it's relationships, material possessions, or our own identities, we set ourselves up for anxiety and distress. This is because the world is constantly changing and nothing lasts forever. Trying to hold on to something that is inherently temporary only causes suffering. The Buddha's teachings on impermanence are encapsulated in the concept of anicca, one of the three marks of existence in Buddhism. According to the Buddha, all phenomena, both internal, our thoughts and feelings, and external, the world around us, are impermanent. They arise, change, and eventually pass away. This applies to everything from our physical bodies to our emotions, relationships, and even our thoughts. The more we attempt to hold on to these fleeting experiences, the more we increase our suffering. Consider the example of a highly successful public figure, such as Oprah Winfrey. Oprah built her career around her talk show and her personal brand, yet she often speaks about how she has learned to let go of her attachment to success and recognition. Throughout her journey, Oprah has come to realize that everything in life is transient, both the good and the bad. For a long time, she struggled with the fear of losing her success or being forgotten, but as she grew older, she began to embrace the idea of impermanence. By recognizing that everything changes, including her career and public image, she learned to focus on what truly matters, the impact she has on others, and her own personal growth. In embracing the impermanence of life, Oprah was able to shift her relationship with anxiety and live more freely. The Buddha's teaching on impermanence encourages us to accept life as it is. Rather than trying to control or avoid the inevitable changes, we are invited to flow with them. True peace, according to the Buddha, comes from recognizing that everything is in a constant state of flux and learning to accept it. The more we resist change, the more we increase our anxiety. But when we embrace the reality of impermanence, we can experience life as it is, unpredictable, constantly changing, and yet beautifully free from attachment. Attachment, aversion, and the cycle of suffering. The Buddha's teachings on attachment and aversion are not meant to imply that we should reject relationships or material possessions entirely. Rather, they guide us toward a balanced understanding of how we relate to the world around us. Attachment and aversion create a cycle of craving and resistance, which leads to suffering. When we crave something, we desire it so intensely that we are fearful of losing it. When we experience aversion, we try to push away what we don't want, creating further resistance and tension. Both of these responses are reactions to the world, and they prevent us from fully experiencing life as it is. As we age, these patterns of attachment and aversion become more pronounced. For example, a person may be highly attached to their career or professional identity. As they approach retirement, they may experience a deep sense of loss and anxiety, as their identity is tied to their job. Alternatively, someone who has lived with chronic health issues may develop an aversion to the aging process, fearing the loss of physical abilities or the decline of their body. This aversion to aging creates resistance, which heightens the experience of anxiety and suffering. Instead of clinging to the past or rejecting the future, the Buddha suggests that we learn to live in the present moment. This is where the practice of mindfulness becomes essential. Mindfulness teaches us to observe our thoughts, feelings, and experiences without judgment. Rather than becoming entangled in the story of our thoughts, we can simply notice them and let them pass, understanding that they are impermanent, living in accordance with impermanence. To live in accordance with the Buddhist understanding of impermanence, we must first recognize the constant nature of change. Every experience we have is temporary, and this recognition allows us to appreciate the present moment. When we stop trying to control or cling to things, we begin to experience a sense of freedom. A prime example of this can be seen in the life of the late Nelson Mandela. Mandela's life was marked by both profound struggles and remarkable achievements. While imprisoned for 27 years, he experienced incredible hardship. However, throughout his years of incarceration, Mandela never clung to resentment or hatred. He understood the impermanence of his circumstances and this understanding gave him the resilience to endure. When he was released from prison and later became South Africa's first black president, he recognized that his role was temporary and that his true calling was to bring peace and reconciliation to his country. Mandela's acceptance of impermanence and his ability to release attachment to his past suffering allowed him to transcend anxiety and embrace his role as a leader. Incorporating the Buddhist teachings on impermanence into daily life requires a shift in perspective. It means understanding that everything we experience, whether it's joy, sorrow, success, or failure, is fleeting. This knowledge can bring a sense of peace and acceptance into our lives. When we stop fearing change and embrace the inevitable flow of life, we experience freedom from anxiety. A transformative thought. This too is just a thought. One of the most transformative insights from Buddhist teachings is the recognition that this too is just a thought. This simple yet profound idea has the potential to radically shift our relationship with anxiety and stress, particularly in the modern world, where we are often overwhelmed by our mental and emotional states. The truth that our thoughts are not absolute truths, but simply mental events or patterns, is a key element in Buddhist philosophy. By internalizing this understanding, we can create a healthier distance between ourselves and the overwhelming emotions that anxiety brings. To explore this concept further, let's break down the idea that thoughts are not a reflection of reality, but are instead echoes of past experiences or habitual patterns. We can begin to understand this by looking at the nature of our thoughts and their influence on our emotions. In doing so, we will examine how this Buddhist thought can be applied in everyday life, with examples from prominent individuals who have faced their own struggles with anxiety and have learned to navigate their minds in a more mindful and aware manner. Understanding thoughts, not absolute truths. At the core of this Buddhist teaching is the recognition that not every thought we have is true or accurate. Thoughts are often fleeting, unsubstantiated, and habitual. The mind is constantly at work, analyzing, interpreting, and often misinterpreting the world around us. We think about the past, worry about the future, and create stories in our minds that amplify our anxieties. Take, for example, a high-profile figure like Elon Musk, the CEO of Tesla and SpaceX. Musk is a visionary with lofty goals, but he is also known for his moments of anxiety and stress. He has openly discussed how, despite his success, he often feels overwhelmed by the expectations placed on him and the challenges of managing multiple companies. Musk's thoughts, like many of us, often dwell on potential failures or unforeseen problems, which can lead to moments of intense anxiety. However, Musk has learned to separate himself from these thoughts. Rather than identifying with them and letting them control his actions, he acknowledges that they are simply thoughts, not immutable truths. By observing them as transient mental events, Musk is able to navigate his stresses more effectively, focusing on his actions rather than the fear or anxiety his thoughts may produce. Similarly, the Buddha taught that we are not our thoughts, we are the awareness that observes them. Thoughts come and go like waves in the ocean, but our true nature, the part of us that is aware of those thoughts, remains constant. Understanding this concept can create a sense of freedom, as it allows us to step back from our thoughts and recognize them for what they are: temporary, often unreliable, and not necessarily connected to reality. The power of identification with thoughts. One of the reasons why thoughts become so powerful in generating anxiety is that we often identify with them. We believe that whatever we think must be true, and that our thoughts define who we are. This is especially common when it comes to negative thoughts or anxious worries. When we identify with our fears, whether they are related to failure, rejection, or loss, we give them power over us. This identification creates a cycle where our fears amplify, and we feel trapped in them. A prominent example of someone who has openly battled with identifying too closely with their thoughts is Lady Gaga. As a world-renowned singer and actress, Lady Gaga's career has been marked by enormous success, but it has also been marked by periods of deep personal struggle, including anxiety and depression. She has discussed how, at times, she has felt overwhelmed by the pressure of her fame and the constant self-scrutiny that comes with being in the public eye. In moments of doubt and anxiety, Lady Gaga was identifying deeply with her thoughts, believing them to be reflective of her reality, when in fact they were just temporary mental events. Through therapy, mindfulness, and self-reflection, Lady Gaga has come to understand that her thoughts are not her identity. She has learned to detach herself from the narrative that her mind creates, particularly in moments of anxiety. This recognition has allowed her to reclaim a sense of agency and freedom. Rather than being consumed by her thoughts, she can now observe them, recognize them for what they are, and move forward with greater emotional stability. This is the core lesson in the Buddhist perspective on anxiety. When we learn to separate ourselves from our thoughts, we diminish their power. We no longer believe every anxious thought that comes our way, and we no longer allow them to dictate our actions or emotional states. By creating this mental space, we free ourselves from the tyranny of anxiety. Thoughts as mental habits, the role of conditioning. Another layer to understanding the Buddhist thought that this too is just a thought is recognizing that many of our thoughts are simply mental habits. The mind is conditioned by years of experiences, and over time, certain thought patterns become ingrained. These thought patterns are often unconscious, and we repeat them without questioning their validity or truth. Anxiety, in particular, thrives on these habitual thoughts, which are often based on past experiences, fears, or learned behaviors. Consider the story of Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex. As a member of the British royal family, Harry grew up under the constant scrutiny of the public eye. He has spoken extensively about the anxiety he has faced throughout his life, particularly following the death of his mother, Princess Diana. The emotional trauma and grief left Harry with a mind conditioned by negative thought patterns, thoughts that often spiraled into anxiety, especially in times of stress or uncertainty. These mental habits were deeply rooted in his experiences and upbringing, where emotional vulnerability was often seen as a weakness. However, as Harry has publicly shared, he has taken significant steps to break free from these habitual thought patterns through therapy, self-reflection, and mindfulness practices. By acknowledging that his anxious thoughts were merely products of his conditioning, not absolute truths, he was able to separate himself from them. Harry's journey is a powerful example of how breaking free from mental habits and identifying thoughts as transient events can lead to greater emotional freedom and peace. The role of mindfulness, observing thoughts without identification. Buddhism offers the practice of mindfulness as a way to observe thoughts without getting attached to them. Mindfulness is the practice of being fully present in the moment and observing the mind without judgment. It is through mindfulness that we begin to see our thoughts for what they truly are, impermanent, often exaggerated, and not inherently true. By observing our thoughts in this way, we can create space between ourselves and the mental noise, allowing us to experience greater peace and clarity. An excellent example of mindfulness in action can be seen in the life of Thich Nhat Hanh, a world-renowned Buddhist monk and mindfulness teacher. Thich Nhat Hanh has spent decades teaching the practice of mindfulness and has emphasized the importance of being present with our thoughts and emotions without becoming attached to them. In his teachings, he often refers to the idea of mindful breathing as a way to anchor ourselves in the present moment and observe our thoughts without being swept away by them. In his book, The Miracle of Mindfulness, Thich Nhat Hanh writes, "When you breathe in, you are aware of your breath. When you breathe out, you are aware of your breath. This is the miracle of mindfulness. You don't need to do anything to make your breath perfect. You just need to be aware of it, and that awareness will bring peace." This practice of mindful awareness allows us to observe our thoughts as they arise, whether they are anxious, joyful, or neutral, without identifying with them. Instead of becoming trapped in the story our thoughts tell us, we simply notice them and let them pass. By practicing mindfulness, we begin to see that our thoughts are not fixed, nor do they define us. We are the awareness that witnesses these thoughts, the power of non-identification with thoughts. When we stop identifying with our thoughts, we begin to regain control over our emotional and mental states. This is the core Buddhist teaching. You are not your thoughts, you are the awareness behind them. This realization can be profoundly liberating, especially for those who struggle with anxiety, as it allows us to distance ourselves from the mental patterns that fuel our distress. A modern-day example of non-identification can be seen in the life of Oprah Winfrey. Oprah has consistently shared her personal struggles with anxiety and how she has learned to manage her thoughts and emotions. For many years, Oprah struggled with the belief that she had to be perfect and in control at all times. Her thoughts would often spiral into anxiety over the idea of not meeting expectations. However, Oprah has since learned that her anxious thoughts are not her identity. Through therapy, mindfulness, and self-compassion, she has come to recognize that thoughts are simply mental events, and she no longer allows them to define her sense of self. Oprah's practice of mindfulness has allowed her to find peace, even in the midst of her busy life. Thoughts as mental habits, the role of conditioning. Another layer to understanding the Buddhist thought that this too is just a thought is recognizing that many of our thoughts are simply mental habits. The mind is conditioned by years of experiences, and over time, certain thought patterns become ingrained. These thought patterns are often unconscious, and we repeat them without questioning their validity or truth. Anxiety, in particular, thrives on these habitual thoughts, which are often based on past experiences, fears, or learned behaviors. Consider the story of Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex. As a member of the British royal family, Harry grew up under the constant scrutiny of the public eye. He has spoken extensively about the anxiety he has faced throughout his life, particularly following the death of his mother, Princess Diana. The emotional trauma and grief left Harry with a mind conditioned by negative thought patterns, thoughts that often spiraled into anxiety, especially in times of stress or uncertainty. These mental habits were deeply rooted in his experiences and upbringing, where emotional vulnerability was often seen as a weakness. However, as Harry has publicly shared, he has taken significant steps to break free from these habitual thought patterns through therapy, self-reflection, and mindfulness practices. By acknowledging that his anxious thoughts were merely products of his conditioning, not absolute truths, he was able to separate himself from them. Harry's journey is a powerful example of how breaking free from mental habits and identifying thoughts as transient events can lead to greater emotional freedom and peace. The role of mindfulness, observing thoughts without identification. Buddhism offers the practice of mindfulness as a way to observe thoughts without getting attached to them. Mindfulness is the practice of being fully present in the moment and observing the mind without judgment. It is through mindfulness that we begin to see our thoughts for what they truly are, impermanent, often exaggerated, and not inherently true. By observing our thoughts in this way, we can create space between ourselves and the mental noise, allowing us to experience greater peace and clarity. An excellent example of mindfulness in action can be seen in the life of Thich Nhat Hanh, a world-renowned Buddhist monk and mindfulness teacher. Thich Nhat Hanh has spent decades teaching the practice of mindfulness and has emphasized the importance of being present with our thoughts and emotions without becoming attached to them. In his teachings, he often refers to the idea of mindful breathing as a way to anchor ourselves in the present moment and observe our thoughts without being swept away by them. In his book, The Miracle of Mindfulness, Thich Nhat Hanh writes, "When you breathe in, you are aware of your breath. When you breathe out, you are aware of your breath. This is the miracle of mindfulness. You don't need to do anything to make your breath perfect. You just need to be aware of it, and that awareness will bring peace." This practice of mindful awareness allows us to observe our thoughts as they arise, whether they are anxious, joyful, or neutral, without identifying with them. Instead of becoming trapped in the story our thoughts tell us, we simply notice them and let them pass. By practicing mindfulness, we begin to see that our thoughts are not fixed, nor do they define us. We are the awareness that witnesses these thoughts, the power of non-identification with thoughts. When we stop identifying with our thoughts, we begin to regain control over our emotional and mental states. This is the core Buddhist teaching. You are not your thoughts, you are the awareness behind them. This realization can be profoundly liberating, especially for those who struggle with anxiety, as it allows us to distance ourselves from the mental patterns that fuel our distress. A modern-day example of non-identification can be seen in the life of Oprah Winfrey. Oprah has consistently shared her personal struggles with anxiety and how she has learned to manage her thoughts and emotions. For many years, Oprah struggled with the belief that she had to be perfect and in control at all times. Her thoughts would often spiral into anxiety over the idea of not meeting expectations. However, Oprah has since learned that her anxious thoughts are not her identity. Through therapy, mindfulness, and self-compassion, she has come to recognize that thoughts are simply mental events, and she no longer allows them to define her sense of self. Oprah's practice of mindfulness has allowed her to find peace, even in the midst of her busy life. The practice of mindfulness, a path to clarity and calm. Mindfulness, or sati in Pali, is one of the most transformative practices in Buddhist philosophy. At its core, mindfulness is the ability to be fully present in the moment, to experience life without judgment or distraction. In the context of anxiety, mindfulness serves as a tool to break free from the grip of worry, stress, and overwhelming thoughts. By anchoring ourselves in the present, we can step out of the endless cycles of rumination about the past or future and focus on what is happening here and now. This practice is deceptively simple. It involves observing our thoughts, bodily sensations, and emotions without attachment or aversion. We don't push away discomfort or try to cling to pleasure. Instead, we allow our experiences to unfold naturally, cultivating a sense of acceptance and awareness. Over time, mindfulness fosters greater mental clarity, emotional resilience, and a profound sense of peace, even in the midst of life's most challenging circumstances. Mindfulness and anxiety, breaking the cycle. Anxiety is a universal human experience, and it often arises when we become lost in thoughts about what has happened or what might happen. We may ruminate over past mistakes, worrying about how they define us, or we may project fears into the future, wondering how we will cope with challenges that haven't even occurred yet. These mental patterns are amplified by attachment to certain outcomes or aversion to perceived threats. Mindfulness offers a powerful antidote to this cycle. By being fully present in the moment, we can break the chain of anxiety. Instead of getting swept away by thoughts about the future or past, mindfulness teaches us to simply observe them as they arise without getting attached to them. We can acknowledge the thought, understand that it is just a passing mental event, and then allow it to dissipate without judgment or identification. Take Oprah Winfrey, for example. Oprah is one of the most well-known and influential figures in the world, but even she is not immune to anxiety. She has openly shared her struggles with mental health, including her battles with anxiety. Despite her fame and success, Oprah has had to learn how to cope with the overwhelming pressure that often accompanies public life. Mindfulness has been a key part of her toolkit. She has spoken about the importance of grounding herself in the present moment, focusing on her breath, and recognizing her thoughts as just fleeting events, not as truths about herself or her circumstances. By practicing mindfulness, Oprah has cultivated a deeper sense of inner peace and emotional resilience. When we become more mindful, we are no longer at the mercy of our thoughts. We can acknowledge them without identifying with them or allowing them to control our emotions. Instead of becoming tangled in the web of anxiety, we create space between ourselves and our mental patterns. This space allows us to respond to life's challenges with clarity and calmness rather than reacting impulsively or out of fear. The foundations of mindfulness, attention and awareness. At its simplest, mindfulness can be broken down into two key components: attention and awareness. Attention refers to the ability to focus on the present moment, while awareness involves observing that moment without judgment or attachment. In Buddhist teachings, mindfulness is often described as the practice of paying attention on purpose in the present moment. This means being fully aware of whatever you are experiencing without the need to alter or judge it. The foundation of mindfulness is the ability to observe what is happening in the present moment. whether it's the breath entering and leaving the body, the sensations of touch, the sounds around you, or the thoughts passing through your mind. In a world full of distractions, this simple act of being present can be incredibly powerful. It allows us to step away from the endless mental chatter that often fuels our anxiety and to connect with the reality of the moment. A great example of the power of attention and awareness in mindfulness comes from Kobe Bryant, the late basketball legend. Bryant was known for his unwavering focus and mental discipline, both on and off the court. He often spoke about the importance of mindfulness in his life, particularly in helping him stay grounded during high-pressure situations. Whether he was taking the final shot in a game or facing personal challenges, Kobe practiced mindfulness to quiet his mind and focus on what mattered in the moment. His ability to remain calm and present under intense pressure was one of the reasons for his legendary career and success. When we train ourselves to pay attention to the present moment, we stop getting caught in the mental loops of worry and fear. Instead, we begin to observe our thoughts and emotions from a place of non-attachment. This doesn't mean that we stop having feelings of anxiety or fear, but rather, we learn to hold those feelings without letting them define us. Mindfulness and the body, paying attention to sensations. In addition to being aware of our thoughts, mindfulness also involves paying attention to the sensations in our body. The body often reacts to anxiety in physical ways: tightness in the chest, shallow breathing, a racing heart. These physical symptoms of anxiety can be disorienting, but mindfulness offers a way to approach them without fear or judgment. Take Michelle Obama, the former First Lady of the United States, as another example. Michelle Obama has spoken about how, during her time in the White House, she experienced periods of high stress and anxiety. She described how the physical sensations of anxiety, racing heartbeats, shallow breath would sometimes overwhelm her. Through mindfulness practices, Obama learned to tune into her body and recognize these sensations without letting them escalate into full-blown panic. By simply observing these sensations and bringing her awareness to her breath, she was able to calm herself and regain a sense of control. This ability to respond mindfully to physical sensations of anxiety is one of the core practices in mindfulness meditation. Mindfulness allows us to observe the body's responses to anxiety without becoming consumed by them. When we pay attention to the sensations in the body, we create space between the feeling and the reaction. This space allows us to break the cycle of anxiety before it spirals out of control. By focusing on the breath or noticing the physical sensations in the body, we can re-anchor ourselves in the present moment, calming the nervous system and reducing the intensity of anxiety. Mindfulness as a daily practice, simple and accessible. One of the most beautiful aspects of mindfulness is that it is not an abstract concept reserved for meditation retreats or experienced practitioners. It is something that can be practiced by anyone, anywhere, at any time. Mindfulness is about cultivating a certain quality of attention and awareness in everything we do. For instance, during a hectic workday, you can practice mindfulness by paying attention to the sensations in your body as you sit at your desk. Notice the feeling of the chair beneath you, the pressure of your feet on the ground, the rhythm of your breath as it flows in and out. You don't need to close your eyes or meditate for long periods to practice mindfulness. Simply becoming aware of the present moment, even in the middle of a busy day, can help you remain grounded and reduce the pull of anxiety. Similarly, mindfulness can be practiced while doing routine tasks such as washing the dishes or taking a walk. The key is to focus on the sensory experience of the task at hand, the feel of the water, the sound of the soap bubbles, the movement of your feet on the ground. By bringing our full attention to these simple activities, we create a sense of presence and calm, which can help us deal with anxiety more effectively. Mindfulness and the mind, observing without judgment. One of the biggest challenges in dealing with anxiety is our tendency to judge our thoughts and feelings. We often label them as good or bad, right or wrong, and this judgment reinforces the anxiety. When we judge our thoughts or emotions, we get caught in a loop of self-criticism, guilt, or shame. Mindfulness teaches us to observe our thoughts without judgment, to let them come and go without attaching labels or labels of approval or disapproval. For example, Prince Harry has been open about his struggles with mental health, including anxiety. He has talked about how, for many years, he struggled with the judgments he placed on his thoughts. The fear and anxiety he experienced were often compounded by the self-criticism he attached to those emotions. However, through mindfulness practices, Prince Harry learned to observe his thoughts without judgment. He recognized that his feelings of anxiety were not reflections of his character or abilities, but simply mental events passing through his mind. By removing the judgment from his anxiety, he was able to process it more effectively and regain a sense of calm. Judging ourselves for having anxious thoughts only strengthens the anxiety. Mindfulness encourages us to simply observe these thoughts without getting caught up in labeling them as wrong or unacceptable. When we stop judging ourselves, we give ourselves permission to feel and experience our emotions without guilt or shame. The benefits of mindfulness: greater peace and emotional resilience. Over time, mindfulness cultivates a sense of calm, clarity, and emotional resilience. By consistently practicing mindfulness, we train ourselves to respond to stress and anxiety with greater equanimity. We learn to meet challenges with a sense of awareness, rather than reacting impulsively or out of fear. Mindfulness provides us with a tool to break free from the cycles of anxiety, helping us to live more fully in the present moment and respond to life's challenges with clarity and calmness. People like Emma Watson, the actress and activist, have spoken about the role of mindfulness in managing anxiety. Watson practices mindfulness to stay grounded in the present moment and to detach from the pressures of fame and public scrutiny. By staying present, she can step outside of the mental chatter that often leads to anxiety, creating space for greater emotional well-being and peace. As we integrate mindfulness into our daily lives, we begin to experience a shift. We are no longer at the mercy of our anxiety. Instead, we become the calm presence observing the waves of thought and emotion as they arise, knowing they are temporary. With time and consistent practice, mindfulness becomes a natural way of being, allowing us to approach life with greater peace, resilience, and clarity. Cultivating compassion, a remedy for anxiety. Anxiety is a complex emotional experience that affects nearly everyone at some point in their lives. It often manifests as a harsh inner critic that constantly reminds us we are not enough, that we are failing, or that we are not living up to our potential. This inner voice, though not inherently our own, amplifies our fears and insecurities, feeding into the cycle of worry and stress. In Buddhism, one of the most powerful antidotes to this self-criticism is the practice of compassion, both for ourselves and for others. Cultivating compassion offers a way to heal the wounds caused by anxiety and to reframe our relationship with ourselves and the world around us. This practice goes beyond mere sympathy or feeling sorry for others. It is an active, transformative practice that can soften the grip of anxiety and help us connect to a deeper sense of peace. The role of compassion in relieving anxiety. At the root of anxiety often lies self-criticism. Our minds are conditioned to constantly evaluate ourselves and our actions, sometimes with harsh judgment. We may believe that we are not doing enough, or that we are not living up to the expectations placed upon us. These beliefs often become self-fulfilling prophecies, feeding into a vicious cycle of worry, fear, and stress. Buddhism teaches that one of the most effective ways to counter this negative self-talk is by cultivating compassion, treating ourselves with the same kindness, understanding, and patience we would offer to a loved one or friend in times of distress. The Buddha's teachings emphasize that compassion is not just about feeling pity for someone else, but about recognizing the suffering in ourselves and others and responding with care and loving kindness. Through this practice, we learn to soften our inner critic and shift our focus from judgment to acceptance. Instead of constantly pushing ourselves to be perfect or to meet impossible standards, compassion allows us to acknowledge our imperfections and embrace them with kindness. For instance, consider the example of Brené Brown, a renowned research professor and author who has spent years studying vulnerability, shame, and empathy. Brown has spoken extensively about how our culture's constant push for perfection leads to feelings of anxiety and inadequacy. Her own journey through these struggles has taught her that embracing vulnerability and practicing self-compassion are key to overcoming the harsh inner critic. By treating herself with the same kindness she encourages others to show, Brown has cultivated resilience in the face of anxiety and has empowered countless others to do the same. When we practice compassion, we create a safe space within ourselves, a refuge from the relentless pressure and fear that often accompany anxiety. Compassion is not about denying our struggles, but about acknowledging them without judgment and offering ourselves the same care and understanding that we would offer a friend in need. This shift in perspective allows us to embrace our humanity and find peace amidst our struggles. The practice of Tonglen, breathing in suffering, breathing out compassion. One particularly powerful method of cultivating compassion in Buddhist practice is Tonglen, a Tibetan meditation technique. The word Tonglen translates to sending and receiving, or taking and giving. This practice involves breathing in the suffering of others and breathing out compassion and healing. It is a profound practice that opens the heart and allows us to actively engage with the pain of the world while simultaneously offering love and healing energy. The process of Tonglen is deceptively simple. When practicing Tonglen, we begin by focusing on our own breath and becoming fully aware of the present moment. Then we visualize the suffering of others, whether they are people we know or those we don't know personally, such as those facing social injustices, illness, or loneliness. As we breathe in, we imagine taking in their suffering, their pain, their fear, and transforming it into love and healing. As we breathe out, we send out compassion, peace, and relief to those who are suffering. Tonglen not only helps others, but it also has a transformative effect on us. By connecting with the suffering of others in this way, we reduce feelings of isolation and fear, replacing them with a sense of connection and empathy. We recognize that we are not alone in our struggles, that suffering is a shared human experience. This realization can ease the anxiety caused by feelings of loneliness and alienation. In fact, studies have shown that practicing compassion and empathy can reduce stress and enhance emotional well-being by increasing feelings of social connection and support. For example, Prince Harry of the United Kingdom, who has been very open about his own struggles with anxiety and mental health, has spoken about how helping others has been a powerful tool in alleviating his own pain. Through his work with mental health initiatives such as Heads Together and his personal advocacy for mental well-being, Prince Harry has connected with people from all walks of life who face emotional and psychological challenges. By practicing compassion through his outreach, he has not only provided support for others, but has also gained a sense of purpose and peace in his own life. He has often spoken about how helping others with their suffering has helped him heal and cope with his own anxiety. In many ways, practicing Tonglen helps us break free from the cycle of self-centered anxiety by focusing on the suffering of others. Instead of being consumed by our own fears, we shift our attention to the well-being of others. This shift from self-focus to compassion allows us to gain a broader perspective, helping us to recognize that, despite our personal struggles, we are part of a larger, interconnected human community. Compassion for ourselves, breaking the cycle of self-criticism. While compassion for others is an important practice, it's equally vital to extend compassion to ourselves. In a culture that often values productivity and achievement over emotional well-being, it's easy to fall into the trap of constantly judging ourselves for our perceived shortcomings. We may tell ourselves that we are not good enough or that we need to do more in order to be worthy of love and acceptance. These negative self-judgments fuel the anxiety that so many people experience. Buddhism teaches that true compassion begins with self-compassion. Without self-compassion, we cannot fully offer compassion to others. By treating ourselves with the same kindness and understanding that we would extend to others, we break the cycle of self-criticism and begin to heal the wounds of anxiety. instead of condemning ourselves for our imperfections. We learn to accept them with loving kindness and care. Take, for example, Emma Watson, the acclaimed actress and UN Women Goodwill Ambassador, who has publicly discussed her own struggles with self-criticism and anxiety. Watson has been open about how, as a public figure, she often faced the pressure to be perfect and to meet the expectations placed on her. But she has also shared how, through mindfulness and self-compassion practices, she has learned to be kinder to herself and to treat herself with more understanding and grace. Emma Watson's journey is a testament to the power of self-compassion in overcoming anxiety. By embracing her imperfections and extending love and care to herself, she has learned to face her fears with greater courage and resilience. Compassion and the brain, neuroscience of kindness. Recent research in neuroscience supports the idea that compassion can significantly reduce the physical symptoms of anxiety. Studies have shown that when we practice compassion, our brains release neurochemicals such as oxytocin, which is often referred to as the love hormone. This chemical is associated with feelings of connection, trust, and bonding. When we practice compassion, whether for ourselves or others, we activate areas of the brain associated with positive emotions, including the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for regulating stress and emotions. Research conducted by Dr. Richard Davidson, a neuroscientist at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, has shown that compassion training can actually alter the structure and function of the brain, making us more resilient to stress and anxiety. Dr. Davidson's work has demonstrated that individuals who regularly practice compassion have increased activity in the areas of the brain that help regulate emotional responses and reduce anxiety. This means that cultivating compassion is not only beneficial for our emotional health, but can also have lasting effects on our brain chemistry, making it easier for us to cope with life's challenges. Tonglen as a spiritual practice, transforming pain into healing. Tonglen offers an even deeper level of compassion because it encourages us to transform our own suffering as well as the suffering of others. The practice of taking and giving allows us to engage with pain in a transformative way. Rather than avoiding pain, we actively take it in, acknowledge it, and then send out healing energy. This process fosters empathy and teaches us that pain, while a natural part of life, does not need to define us. We are not our suffering, we are the awareness behind it. By breathing in the suffering of others and breathing out compassion, we begin to experience the interconnectedness of all beings. We recognize that our own pain is not isolated, but is part of the shared human experience. This realization can reduce feelings of isolation and fear and increase feelings of connection and compassion. As we extend compassion to others, we simultaneously heal ourselves. In Dalai Lama's teachings, the practice of compassion is central to his philosophy of life. The Dalai Lama often speaks about the importance of cultivating compassion, not just for others, but for ourselves. He believes that true peace can only be found through the practice of compassion, and that by transforming our relationship with pain and suffering, we can live a life of greater peace, joy, and contentment. Cultivating compassion, a lifelong practice. The practice of cultivating compassion is not a one-time fix for anxiety. It is a lifelong process that requires patience, commitment, and self-awareness. Compassion is not something that we simply achieve and then move on from. It is an ongoing practice that deepens over time as we encounter new challenges and experiences. The more we practice compassion, the more natural it becomes, and the more resilient we become in the face of adversity. When we learn to approach anxiety and suffering with compassion, we begin to see them in a new light. We no longer view anxiety as something to be feared or avoided. Instead, we recognize it as an opportunity to practice kindness and care. By offering ourselves compassion in times of distress, we not only alleviate our anxiety, but we also foster greater emotional resilience, creating a sense of inner peace that will carry us through life's inevitable ups and downs. Personal reflection, embracing impermanence to alleviate anxiety. Throughout my life, I have come to realize that embracing the impermanence of existence has been one of the most liberating shifts in my mental and emotional life. It has not only altered how I perceive myself, but has fundamentally changed my relationship with anxiety. There is a profound, almost magical release that happens when we stop resisting the inevitable nature of change and instead choose to flow with it, understanding it as part of the human experience. In this reflection, I will share how this change in perspective has shaped my understanding of anxiety, using both personal insights and examples of well-known figures who have navigated their own journeys of growth, transformation, and peace. The struggle with resistance, a common experience. For many years, I struggled with anxiety that stemmed from my deep resistance to change. It wasn't just the fear of the unknown that triggered my anxiety, but also the attachment I had to specific outcomes or states of being. I clung to people, possessions, and certain emotional states, believing that these things provided stability and security. But the more I clung to them, the more I experienced fear at the thought of losing them. Whether it was my relationships, my career, or even the image I held of myself, the resistance to change was palpable in almost every aspect of my life. This resistance is something we all experience in some form. Take, for instance, Steve Jobs, the co-founder of Apple. Jobs was known for his uncompromising vision and dedication to his work. He was deeply attached to his ideas and his company. However, his attachment to Apple's success and his vision was both a source of incredible innovation and a deep source of suffering. When Jobs was diagnosed with cancer, he faced an existential crisis that forced him to confront the impermanence of life. His resistance to death, a natural part of the human experience, caused him significant emotional and mental turmoil. Only when he learned to embrace the impermanence of his own life did he begin to find peace, famously reflecting in his later years on the need to accept the inevitability of death. My own story mirrors this struggle with resistance. I remember a particularly overwhelming period when I found myself gripped by anxiety due to the thought of losing a loved one. It wasn't a direct loss at the time, but the fear of losing someone I cared deeply about sent waves of anxiety through me. The thought of change, of the shifting dynamics in my life, was too much to bear. But over time, I began to realize that my fear was not rooted in the love I had for that person. It was rooted in my attachment to how things should be and my unwillingness to accept change. Shifting the perspective, recognizing the role of attachment. The turning point came when I began to explore the teachings of Buddhism, particularly the concept of attachment and impermanence. In Buddhism, attachment is seen as one of the root causes of suffering. When we attach ourselves to people, possessions, or even certain identities, we create an expectation of permanence in a world that is inherently transient. This expectation sets us up for inevitable pain when change occurs. Anxiety, I realized, is the mental response to the fear of losing what we are attached to. This insight came to me during a period of intense self-reflection. I started practicing mindfulness, simply observing my thoughts without judgment as they arose. I began to notice how my thoughts about potential loss would stir feelings of anxiety in my chest. But as I observed these thoughts more closely, I began to see that they were not based on reality. They were simply echoes of past fears, fears that had been shaped by my attachment to the past and my anxiety about the future. As I observed my thoughts, I also realized that my attachment to certain outcomes, such as holding on to my relationships in a specific way or fearing the loss of something dear to me, was directly contributing to my anxiety. These attachments were not grounded in the present moment, but were instead projections of my past experiences and future concerns. It was as if I was trying to hold on to something that, by nature, was meant to flow and change. One of the most powerful moments of this realization came when I took a step back and reflected on how life, in its essence, is constantly shifting. People come into our lives and they leave. We experience moments of joy, and we experience moments of loss. Health fluctuates, jobs come and go, and even our sense of self is not as solid as we once believed. This understanding that everything is impermanent gave me the freedom to loosen my grip on the things I feared losing and, in turn, let go of much of my anxiety. The practice of compassion, transforming fear into peace, in addition to embracing impermanence. One of the most significant tools in my journey has been the practice of compassion, particularly self-compassion. The Buddha taught that compassion is not just for others, but for ourselves as well. It is about treating ourselves with kindness and understanding, especially when we are experiencing anxiety or fear. For so long, I had been my harshest critic. I judged myself for feeling anxious, as though it was a personal flaw or failure. But as I learned more about the practice of compassion, I began to treat myself with the same patience and care I would offer to a friend in need. The practice of compassion, particularly Tonglen, a Tibetan Buddhist meditation, became a transformative tool in this process. Tonglen involves breathing in the suffering of others and breathing out compassion and healing. Initially, the thought of taking in the suffering of others felt daunting, but as I practiced, I found that this act of compassion opened my heart. Not only did I send out love and healing energy to others, but I also began to feel a sense of peace within myself. The more I focused on compassion, the less my anxiety consumed me. Rather than getting caught up in my own worries, I was able to step outside of myself and focus on the shared human experience of suffering. In this way, compassion acted as both a healing force for others and a transformative force for me. By practicing Tonglen, I learned to release my attachment to my own suffering and in turn reduced my anxiety. Compassion allowed me to acknowledge my fear and anxiety, but instead of clinging to it, I was able to transform it into something positive, love, and healing. The practice of self-compassion was, and still is, a continuous process. It's not something I've mastered overnight, but through consistent practice, I've learned to soften my inner critic and embrace my imperfections. When anxiety arises, instead of berating myself for feeling fearful, I acknowledge the feeling with kindness. I tell myself, it's okay to feel this way. You are doing your best, and you are worthy of compassion. This shift in how I treat myself has helped me manage anxiety in ways I never thought possible. The role of impermanence in my life. As I reflect on my journey, I realize that embracing the impermanence of life has allowed me to approach anxiety with a sense of acceptance. The more I understand that change is inevitable, the less I resist it. I no longer expect life to stay the same, nor do I expect the people and things in my life to remain fixed. This perspective has allowed me to see the beauty in life's constant evolution, rather than viewing change as a threat. I recall a moment when I experienced a profound shift in my understanding of impermanence. A loved one was facing a serious illness, and for a time I found myself consumed by anxiety about the potential loss. But rather than succumbing to fear, I allowed myself to sit with the reality of the situation. I recognized that, just as life brings joy and love, it also brings loss and grief. This acceptance did not make the situation easier, but it allowed me to find peace in the face of uncertainty. It was a powerful reminder that anxiety often arises from our resistance to the flow of life. When we can surrender to the natural rhythms of existence, we can find peace even in the midst of turmoil. This lesson has been crucial in my personal journey. By embracing impermanence and practicing compassion, I've been able to reduce my anxiety and find a sense of peace that I had long been seeking. I now approach life with a deeper understanding of its transience. And with that understanding comes a greater capacity for joy, love, and emotional resilience. The peace found in letting go. In the end, I've come to understand that the key to overcoming anxiety is not to fight against it, but to allow it to be. Rather than resisting change or trying to control everything in my life, I now embrace the flow of life with open arms. I accept that anxiety may come and go, but it no longer defines me. It is merely a visitor that passes through. And when it does arise, I meet it with compassion, knowing that I am worthy of love and care, even in moments of fear and uncertainty. This shift in perspective, from resistance to acceptance, has allowed me to cultivate a sense of peace and balance in my life. It has not only transformed my relationship with anxiety, but also deepened my connection with myself and others. I now approach each day with the understanding that change is a natural part of life, and that, no matter what happens, I have the tools to cope and find peace in the face of uncertainty. As we conclude, I hope this exploration into the Buddha's teachings has illuminated how attachment, aversion, and the impermanence of life are not just abstract ideas, but real forces that shape our experience of anxiety. By embracing the impermanence of our thoughts, our emotions, and our circumstances, we can begin to release our attachment to the things that trigger anxiety and, in turn, open our hearts to greater peace. Remember, the practice of mindfulness and compassion is a journey, one that is ongoing as we continue to learn and grow. But by acknowledging that anxiety is not our enemy but a natural part of life, we free ourselves to live more fully and peacefully in the present moment. Whether through mindfulness or compassion practices like Tonglen, we can start to see anxiety not as something to fight against, but something that teaches us to be more present and more kind to ourselves and others. As you reflect on your own journey, consider how you can incorporate these Buddhist insights into your life. What attachments might you be holding onto that are feeding your anxiety? Where could compassion replace self-criticism in your daily routine? With these tools, you can begin to cultivate a life of inner peace, free from the fear of change. Thank you for watching. If this video resonated with you, please consider subscribing to Buddhism Wisdom Teachings for more insights on how to live a peaceful, mindful life.